No,
Perfect
no.
time.
Sounds
Perfect
like I didn't
timing.
miss the official start though.
Perfect timing. Okay. Uh, this is the YouTube Unfiltered recording. We're going to talk about how we want to use prioritization and how we schedule bugs better. And on the call, there's Craig Gomes, Joshua Lambert, Christopher, our senior director of development, and also Tanya, interim manager of quality engineering. So let's hear it.
So back to labels and how often and how much.
Yes. So let me frame the background here. I think what Josh said earlier was no new labels, right? We don't want to add more to the complexity here, and we don't want to apply labels, especially priority labels, without considering the time to deliver or the consequence of that.
Yeah, to restate a little bit, I think we potentially discussed having additional priority labels, P5, 6, 7, 8. But I think at some point, how many different priorities do you actually need? And, and at some point, at a certain distance out, it's all sort of fuzzy anyways, right? Setting SLO of a year, it seems quite silly. So I think we aligned on having 4, with P4 not having a particular date attached. And then 1, 2, and 3 having a minimum delivery time. So I think we're aligned there. And the next question is that, in looking at some of the bug backlogs, we have bugs that are P3 and P2 that open for a very long time, years in some cases. And while there is benefit in having them triage and having some sense of priority attached, the fact that we have a label which is communicating externally a certain due date that we know or have no intention of meeting doesn't feel great, right? It's communicating a sense to our customers that yes, we know this is P2, and there's a date attached to it, but we just have no intention of actually delivering this within that time frame. So I think we need to fix that and have the P1, 2, and 3 be achievable. I think we can miss in some cases, right? Which is fine. But for cases where we know we're not going to make it, then we should figure out something else to do. If that makes sense. And part of that might be regrooming some of these things, right? So some of the P3s that haven't been looked at in a year and a half, we can figure out how to solve it. But I think that would be where I'd come from a customer standpoint, which is I would hope the P labels mean something, and if we're having SLOs, then they should be achievable.
So we do want to ask product managers to go back and regroom their backlog if it's achievable P1, P2, P3s or not. If not, move it over to P4s.
Yeah, another case would be to just remove the dates on the Ps and just keep them. But I don't think we want to. I mean, that's an option. And that way, we're not at least communicating something that's not that we know is not going to be the case to folks. Or we go through and try to groom them. I think grooming them should be done anyways, frankly, and we can figure out how the best way to do that. Whether we go through and close ones that are older than 2 years or whatnot. I mean, some of the more mature stages have over 1,000 bugs in the backlog,
right.
And that just they'll take you days, I think, to get through. So I think we can figure out a way to try and triage them. I think a good step would be to just do one of two things: remove the SLO dates or lower the ones that we just aren't going to try and achieve. So I think I have a question to you over where maybe Mecca's quality on the date side. How you feel about that?
I'm more concerned on getting S1 and S2s fixed ASAP. I think the rest can wait. I don't really want to change the dates because we now have a lockstep with security that P1, it means something across the board, right? And then we want to use that across the board as well. Now, I did propose adding P5, and I think that's already killed. So we're not going to talk about that. I think it makes sense to move it to P4s and actually remove any SLOs around P4s, because that's like the back bucket. I am also concerned on if something was a P1 before. I think we talked about this before, Josh. Like it was a P1 before, and it starts to slip, right? I understand that we have a lot of stuff, so moving to P4 is fine. But do we want to track that this used to be a P1 before and now it's a P4, or we just want to say, hey, folks, let's reset across the board. Whatever is done before, it's okay. But like going forward, a P1 is a P1, and then if you leave it there, it means something. And now it's like the time for us to just do a reset so it's achievable and just not have alarms fire up everywhere. And I would love to hear from others as well.
It seems like a smell to me if we have a lot of P3s that are not getting done within the P3 SLO, or anything not getting done within their SLOs, that either we're setting too high of a priority when we first initially label those, so we should address that, or we're not doing a good job in our planning process where we're prioritizing feature work above fixing these bugs that we've already prioritized as needing help, which then is a conversation between EMs and PMs that needs to shift a little bit. Or we just need to hire a bunch more people, which is, given the constraints, is not, we're doing the best we can. But it's a smell to me of something deeper underneath.
So I'm just go back reading the page, and I think I know what the challenge is, or at least I'm getting a better sense for the challenge, which I'm trying to figure out how to best articulate, which is the way we define it on the page is priority determines how quickly the defect turnaround time must be. So we're defining a timetable associated with it, as opposed to if you're really doing prioritization says, I got this many people working on this, and this is the things that they can work on, right? And those are two different mindsets. And I'm trying to figure out which one is the right one. And it sounds like for security's been using the prioritization with it must be done by this point. And it sounds like product is using it as we could use it that way, but product then needs to figure out, is it okay? Is it really that time frame, or is it, or something else? And you could argue, well, they should do it in the same way. The challenge with that is there's a volume question there, right? And I'm not sure how best to reconcile that at this point.
Yeah, I think the dates make sense for security, right? There are disclosure requirements and timelines around that. So I think the product team I think everyone's been trying to really rally around those timelines. And if we don't think we can achieve them, we've been going to security and essentially saying, hey, we can't do this. And then we'll have a discussion at that point in time. But I think that's the exception. So I think it's worthwhile for security. I think to your point.
Sorry, what was the exception?
If for some reason the team can't, like if the fix is larger than we can get done, or if for whatever reason, prioritization wise and what else we have to do, we wouldn't be able to get the security one finished, then we would go to security to say, hey, we don't think we can meet this priority date. And then there's a conversation that happens around, what we should do. I think that maybe happened a couple times, but I think by and large, we've really tried to stick to the SLOs and the priorities for security issues. And so I think there's a lot of value there. I think to your point, I agree. And then the larger challenge is the bug backlog, especially for manage, create, and plan, which are enormous. And how do we achieve that? I agree with you that the dates for those.
Yeah. So then if we want to play the security model, security has very well defined when it becomes urgent versus next release versus those, right? I think that we'd have to have the similar equivalent of that for product, like 10 million. I'll use the moniker. $10 million is on the line, so it's a P1 versus this is an annoyance for a customer. It's a P4 kind of thing, right? Like so, some some level of assessment associated with that. And I'm not necessarily looking for like super hard assessments, but I am also looking for some consistency and criteria assigned, right?
Yeah, I wonder how much value there is in trying to get really like detailed about the impact. Like if you're going to spend a bunch of time trying to quantify the impact, like how much money or how many people involved. I'm not sure that's a terribly awesome use of time. And I think the teams we'll hopefully do more diligence. I think we have an activity going back and ask the teams to sort of to take a look at their backlogs and tell us what's going on. P1s are getting solved, no problem. And so I think the big ones aren't a challenge. It's the P2s, I think, in areas that aren't getting as much attention, like Wiki, for example, where we just aren't spending any time, but there's P2 bugs in there. And then on occasion, there's some P2s elsewhere that have been open for longer than we'd be happy with. But I think the team is sort of having conversations around how do we solve that problem for the P2s, in particular for these like 3 mature stages. The rest of the stages, I don't think I have a problem generally looking at the backlogs. And then like, I think the larger issue then is the P3s, which just struggle on forever. And so I think, I guess I would vote for the bugs, priorities, that we track the priorities and when, like on the dates on how long we solve them, but I'm not sure it makes total sense to set hard deadlines on them, because you'll have cases where like a wiki, we're just not doing much there, and so we're just going to be open for a while, and since the P4 means that you've lost any prioritization of the issues that was done, which doesn't feel great, because then you lost all that work that was performed, and now you have a flat list of ungroomed issues again, basically.
So if I may chime in, it's not a hard deadline right now because it's an SLO, right? We want to move to making these numbers better, right? How about we focus on bugs with the customer label? Because I think that's a more important funnel to tackle than just bugs that are not affecting a customer or have not been found to affect the customer. I think that's part of why I want to make this number better, right? We want to reduce the time to resolve bugs for our customers. And if I were to prioritize, I would pick that bucket first and not like a blanket all P3, P4s of all bugs.
Yeah, I agree that should be a factor in the prioritization, but I guess to restate my concern, my thought is I don't mind the dates. If we, but the problem with the dates is that the only thing that doesn't have a date attached to it is the last one, and given the current backlogs and the realities of some of the teams, that's going to force. If we're being honest about the dates, it's going to force a lot of things in the P4, which doesn't make sense. And so
Can you unpack that when you say it doesn't make sense?
Sure. Well, so let's look at what's this? I'm trying to pull up.
Which one do you want?
If you can pull up like manage, for example, which is just one that's a mature stage, that has a whole bunch of bugs. I think right around 1,000.
And we want the old view, correct? The team view?
Yeah, I think so.
And then it's in the chat. Bugs by team, okay. That's the one you wanted, Josh?
Yeah, I'm trying. We don't have the cumulative view for. I don't think for. But anyways, yeah, so we have 188, we have 330 P4s, 259 P3s, and 35 P2s. So in this case, I think, again, P2, we need to improve there. And I think the teams have desire to do so when conversations are happening on how to better achieve that. My challenge is P3s have a date of, is it 90 days? Or 120 is a PLO, 90 days for P3. And there's nowhere we're going to solve 260 bugs in 3 months.
This feels like another argument for a P5 bucket, where a P4 would be a quarter long.
No, well, like what I'm actually thinking about is what do you want the behavior to be? So a team finds itself in this situation. What do you want the behavior to be? Do you want it to be this bucket should be prioritized, that features stop occurring, and we say this is more important? Like, what's the judgment call here? That, like, what's the behavior that we want to see happen? Because like that's ultimately what I'm struggling with is like, if we put a date, if we put a timeline associated when we assign a priority to something, then we're basically saying this is the behavior that we want. And if that's the behavior we want, then it has to be at some, like in that situation, we're saying it's at the cost of something else. And what I don't have a good sense for is that the right call? And if the right call is yes, then everybody should be on the same page as that. And if the answer is we don't know, then it feels like we've got to fix that part of it before we even consider that aspect of it. And that's why I'm even less inclined to go to 5 categories, because like all we're doing is we're just spreading the problem. We're not actually saying, okay, like this is behavior we want, right? Like what I heard is well, we're not going to fix this 263. Well, okay, is it we're not going to fix them, or is it that we're going to push off features, or what is our thought process there? What do we want to encourage product management and engineering to do in that scenario?
Well, we have the other issue too, that this documentation points to bugs, right? When the labels are actually used on non-bugs as well. So we're kind of shoehorning two things into one by having a priority and a timeline on it, where one may not apply. Usually timeline doesn't apply to, like, if we have like Puma is a #1 priority for the memory team right now. So we're getting a lot of P1 labels on things that we're working on, but they're not bugs. And we're probably not going to hit 30 days in some cases because we're planning out our work going forward. So it almost seems like, sorry, go ahead.
Does SLOs should only apply for bugs?
Okay.
We're not using it for features.
Okay.
How many are customer related? Do we have that cut of it? I'm sorry.
We're not doing a good job. We have some automation coming around to automatically apply customer label on bug labels, but I think we have some of the time to close. I only have it sliced by closed bugs, not open bugs. We can work on getting that in, but that's a good call.
Do you understand what I'm saying, Josh? Like my main point, like I'm really trying to figure out how to affect behavior here more than anything else. Like let's take the assumption that we're always going to have more bugs than we have resourcing or people to basically address. Every organization that I've been in has been growing 130% year over year, has this problem. Let's make the assumption that we want this to be how we get the right informed behavior and set expectations. If those are two high level assumptions, how do we look at this scenario and say, okay, like how should we evaluate it? And the tricky part here is we've already established kind of like, if security hadn't already established this kind of mindset, I would just be like, well, priority is just, that's the freedom and there are no SLOs associated with it, right? It's really around the fact that we've already kind of established it. So it's almost like, I'll pull the fifth label in Tanya was talking about, which is, feature versus security and priority is, treated differently, but that's going to confuse people. Like feature priority versus, or product priority versus priority, security priority.
Yeah. I think the behavior on P1s is fine, right? Those are big. That's having a tight deadline on those. That's a good behavior we want to have. P2s, I think we also want to have some general pressure. And looking at those, they are generally, things that we want to solve, right? They're pretty painful. P3s, I'm just spot checking a few of these, right? Like downloading a repository archive using API with dots in the name. No thumbs up. One person reported it. It's a P3. I'll just link it here. I just did a search for managed P3 with reproduced on GitLab.com. So at least we have something that's been reproduced. Should that be done in 3 months? Not necessarily. I don't think it has to. We validated it, which is great. So some of this is grooming. Now, if you groom into the buckets of P3, then that's one thing. But I think we have P3 in a lot of things that aren't necessarily this urgent. So, I'd agree with you, Christopher, on maybe not having dates. But I think my main problem is the P3s. I'm comfortable with P1s. I'm comfortable with P2s. There should be pressure to try and solve those. P3s.
It sounds like we need to go back and regroom P3s and just push it back.
There's hundreds though of these things, and you kind of want to have a total. Well, so the behavior on these, I would think should just be just keep an eye on them, right? Like try not to have this massively growing backlog of P3s that's just spiraling out of control. I think would be the behavior I want to have on P3s. And so just manage it, keep an eye on it. I think that would be the behavior that I would rather have than any sort of like deadline to try and address P3s.
I just pulled this up because I thought it was interesting that now some of this may be a proportionality of it. So like P1s versus P2s versus P3s. But it doesn't look like we're using prioritization, like from a volume. Certainly from I would have expected to see, P1s being the largest list, and then proportionally smaller. And if anything, I'm seeing the opposite. Like I'm seeing our equivalent distribution, I suppose the opposite maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah, in this instance, we're actually getting to P3s, which is good. They might be low-hanging fruit. Maybe that's where we're getting to them, as opposed to the backlog of P2s that we have in some cases. I also curious, like what stages those are coming from. Because I know that for most of the newer stages, they don't have a big bug problem, and they've just been solving them, as they come in largely. It's I think, and so for those, the dates are probably fine, right? That's not a really concern for them. I think the dates are really concerned for create, manage, plan.
Yep, the big threes that's been along for the longest time.
Yeah, and that's where you end up in a situation where they have 300 some odd P3s, and I think my recommendation to them would be just try and make sure you manage it, and you have some good grooming in there, and that's not just continuing to spiral out of control, because that's a sign that you're going to frustrate customers. And we're already getting some of that, like, oh, GitLab is so buggy, you're focusing on new features, like some of that commentary. But I think it's just to be managed. So I think that'd be the behavior on the P1, P2s, and P3s and P4s. P4s fall in the same bucket as P3s, I think. Our definition of P3 is is what for bugs?
P3 says within the next 3 releases.
We don't give like
Approximately 1 quarter, as opposed to anything outside of the next 3 releases is which actually, to be honest, your proposal, if I interpret your proposal, which is remove an SL expectation around P3s, that kind of fits in with the velocity over predictability in regards to the fact that we may plan out the next month, but we don't really look out 2 quarters to say, okay, here's how we should be doing. And it's probably disingenuous to our customers to say, yeah, we're going to get to something in the 3 to 6 month time frame, or from that perspective versus the 1 to 3 month time frame. Like, we usually have a pretty good idea of 1 to 2 months, but like beyond that, I would question any level of planning at this point.
Do we want to remove the missed SLO detection for P3s? Just focus on P1, P2s, and emphasize on that.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, why don't we do that then? So we relieve the pressure on P3s while we regroom this.
Yeah, I think that's a good step for sure.
Okay, taking notes down. 1 second.
Thanks for that perspective, by the way, Josh. That really helps.
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting that the that priority is totally time-based in looking at these. There's no definition of impact for priority.
Well, that's severity, which was the other way I was going to look at this, and I've already asked like Mech for 15 different cuts of metrics this week, so I was holding myself back, but like a heat map is what I was thinking about.
We do have some heat maps already.
Do you have a sev versus priority?
Yes, we do. I'm going to show it right now. It's being rolled out.
It seems like we have a lot of P1 S1, P2 S2, P3 S3, and you just sort of, oh, it's an S3, so I'm going to apply. Yeah, thanks.
So this is going to be rolled out for every group next week. And they will see a heat map of the bugs in their area. I don't have work in progress to put this in a dashboard yet, but I think that's probably the next step, either in whatever dashboard as the overall heat map. But this will be generated per week. So the metric's there.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have the rule of thumb in here, but kind of my high level rule of thumb is if I see something farther than 2 off in the numbers, I scratch my head a little bit. So like a sev1 with a P4 doesn't make any sense to me. Similarly, a sev4 with a P1 doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless it's like blocking product blocking product development in some way, but it has absolutely no customer impact or something, some screwy situation like that. But even then, I would still say that we would probably put that as a sev1 or 2 if it was blocking product development.
There could be low severity, high priorities, like the cosmetic issues that look really bad, like on the front page that everybody sees. Like that should be fixed soon. Like those are examples. Like that shouldn't come up as often.
Maybe. I would still argue that if it's on the front page and every customer sees it, that your customer impact is high.
Yeah, sorry, that's a bad example. Like in the MR page or the issue page where it's very prominent.
Yeah. Let's see what the heat map shows us. I'm just telling you what my rule of thumb is, and I can be told I'm wrong on that. I'm thinking about previous systems I've been in where I've seen a large number of like usually it's as severity gets higher, the priority obviously gets higher. There are exceptions to that though.
Right. There should be some correlation. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Tanya.
It sounds like what we're talking about here is separating out the affected users from having an impact on the severity label and have that be a part of the priority label categorization instead?
More that as you get higher in severity, the likelihood that you're going to make that a high priority issue to address is greater. So, like, if you have a Sev 1 impacting issue, we're more likely to make it a high priority to go fix it, just because it's classified as high impacting.
So it's almost as if we're saying our SLO should be dependent on the pairing of the labels versus one label or another.
Yeah, in a more traditional system, you would only make it on, you wouldn't make it on priority, you'd make it on severity, and then you would staff your engineering resources accordingly. So I think that's kind of what we're wrestling with here is we chose to put it on the P1. You could argue that the blend of the two is the other way to look at it. So now, like, only people who are in this conversation will understand that and explain that to the rest of the people to use it effectively is like, going to be training people up on that is I think, and getting them to do it consistently would be tricky.
So one thing I'm wondering is if we should just more aggressively have higher bars for P3. Like, are we just too lenient on what's a P3 because of the fact that we know if we put it in P4, it'll be like lost in the pool of P4s. Because so there's no severity. There's no we've already no guidance on what should be a P3 other than this should be fixed in 3 releases. And I think that's about as far, to your point, as that we ever want to go, right? Because otherwise it just gets way too fuzzy. And even that's pretty far, but for security, maybe it's helpful. And then just using it, the severity labels, and maybe we need to be a little more cognizant of those. But even if you have an S3, if it's impacting up to 25% of our users, that probably shouldn't be something we're going to sit on for 90 days. Right.
Which that's an argument for it to be an S2, P2, which, that seems reasonable from that perspective.
I guess the problem is that we're saying broken feature with an acceptable workaround. So if there's no workaround, or not an acceptable workaround, then it gets flagged as an S3. So even though it might not affect many users, like one, if there's no workaround, I think people are probably bucketing it as S3. My sense? Because otherwise you'd probably see more.
Let me share the correct screen here.
Yeah, and I think the way we interpret this generally is you look across these different vectors, and if you see something that is higher, you always err on the side of higher based on it. So broken feature workaround too complex and unacceptable would immediately, regardless of the impact to users, would probably put you in an S2. Unless you saw like less than 5% of users, maybe. So, even that, in that situation, I think you might still say it's an S2.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to like that one where if you have a dot in the project name, you have to use the API to export, or literally no one's, like probably one person's come across it. And by that definition, it would be an S2 potentially.
Yeah, though that's a good example where if it's at one customer and we're growing as fast as we are, that could quickly turn into 10 customers, right? So like that's where sometimes like if not having an acceptable workaround means, yeah, you got to go fix those, even if it is a small population at this point, because you just don't know if that's unless you have a guarantee that population isn't going to grow.
Shall we move on to action items so we can?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just around it. I'm just looking at examples because I'm not in the manage and create space. I don't know all of their details. So I think it's in the newer stages. Again, this isn't really a problem.
Okay. So I think what we concluded was we're going to ask folks to regroup the P2, P3 backlogs, correct? And I will remove the missed SLO detection from P3s to relieve the pressure as we go through this exercise. That's the main action items.
Mac, you good with that decision? I know it's not headed probably in the direction. Like do you think that we're doing a disservice to quality?
No, I think P1, P2s are by your theory, right? It should correlate with S1, S2s, like 80%. So let's focus on that and relieve the pressure because it's a huge backlog. And with the spirit of GitLab, I think it makes sense in this case. I don't want to push for things to get done without understanding the underlying reasoning. So it makes sense for me. So just a backstory, and for the record, we used to have different priority labels like application AP1, AP2, and then other. There are many tracks of priorities. I was really happy last year where we just consolidated one. Now we have just one priority label. So I think this needs to be improved, but I think we are improving per se, but we just need to get the close rates better.
Yeah, the other thing I wonder about is whether or not I've been wrestling with is like if a lot of these are like 2 years old, as if they've been fixed and just duplication and all that kind of good stuff that the normal grooming kind of stuff picks up, but we have to be committed to cutting down the volume.
Yes, we have guidelines on like lead on closing. If it's old and nobody responds, like close it. That should be part of the grooming. And,
yeah, the way most open source projects I've seen is if you have something that customers reported that's over some period of time, you close it and you send a note to the reporter to basically say, if this is still a problem, please reopen the issue and report it. Update us with how to reproduce it.
We have that process actually.
Okay, all right. So we are doing that in some level.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's lean on that, and people need to go and eat. I will upload this to YouTube, and we'll put an agenda in the product team meeting this Tuesday. And Josh, you can lead with that discussion, and I'll be there.
Yeah, I will. And I'll just see what people's thoughts are about just reprioritizing Ps to just be realistic. And the other thing, real quick, Mac, I didn't realize we had a default severity we applied. That's S3. Do we still do that?
No, we don't. That was like way before when we were trying to get a sense of what the severity was like.
Okay, because that might be why we have a whole bunch of S3s. There's 618 with the default severity label applied. And we can wrap this up and take that offline, but that might also be why I have so many.
That could also be why. I need to talk to Mark Fletcher. I think there was some of the automation when there was an OKR to try to get the undefined up, and then that was the decision we made where if it's really, that was a default labeling that we went through. That could also be playing into this.
Cool. All right, thanks everyone.
Okay.